The white hull of the Terran medical vessel Healing Dawn moved through space like a gentle giant among the stars, and Captain Lee Taman stood on the bridge, watching the darkness ahead with careful eyes that had seen too much war in his younger days but now focused only on saving lives instead of taking them. And the bridge around him hummed with the quiet efficiency of a crew dedicated to healing rather than fighting, while the soft blue lights cast peaceful shadows on the walls covered with medical charts and emergency protocols rather than weapon systems and tactical displays. Lee Taman had commanded this hospital ship for 3 years now, and every day reminded him why he had left his position as a destroyer captain to join the Medical Corps, because there was something pure about their mission that war had never been able to give him, and his crew of 200 medical professionals shared that same dedication to preserving life wherever they found it, regardless of species or allegiance. And today they were heading toward the neutral zone between human and Valthari space, where refugees from the ongoing conflict desperately needed their help. Dr. Park Ji-woo entered the bridge carrying a medical tablet, and her tired eyes showed the strain of the past week spent treating wounded civilians from 3 different species, but her voice remained steady and professional as she approached the captain and said that the medical bays were ready for whatever they might find, and that her team had prepared special equipment for treating Valthari physiology, just in case they encountered refugees from that species. And Lee Taman nodded his appreciation, because Dr. Park had become the finest trauma surgeon in this sector of space, and her innovations in cross-species medical treatment had saved countless lives over the years. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, and Lieutenant Yoon Da-yoon monitored communications while scanning for any distress signals that might indicate someone needed their help. And beside her, Commander Choi Byung-ho kept watch over the ship's defensive systems, which were minimal compared to warships, but still necessary for protection in these dangerous times. And though the Healing Dawn carried only basic shields and light weapons, their real protection came from the universal respect that most civilized species had for medical vessels, and the understanding that attacking healers was considered one of the worst crimes in galactic law. A soft beep from the communications console caught everyone's attention, and Lieutenant Yoon looked up with concern in her voice as she reported that she was receiving a distress signal from the Kepler 442 system, and that the signal appeared to be coming from a civilian transport vessel that was badly damaged and requesting immediate medical assistance. And the transmission was weak and filled with static, but they could make out voices speaking in the Valthari language and what sounded like children crying in the background. Captain Lee Taman felt his heart tighten at the sound of those frightened voices, because children were always the innocent victims in any conflict, and he immediately ordered the helm to change course toward the source of the distress signal, while Dr. Park hurried back to the medical bays to prepare her team for treating Valthari patients. And within minutes the entire ship was buzzing with activity as nurses and doctors prepared equipment and medical supplies for what could be a major emergency response. Commander Choi approached the captain with a concerned expression and quietly mentioned that they were entering a region of space that had seen several pirate attacks recently, and that perhaps they should request a military escort before proceeding. But Lee Taman shook his head and reminded him that medical vessels were protected by interstellar law, and that delaying their response could mean the difference between life and death for whoever was sending that distress signal. And besides, the Healing Dawn had responded to hundreds of similar calls without incident over the years. As they approached the coordinates of the distress signal, the main viewscreen showed a battered Valthari transport drifting powerless through space with huge holes torn in its hull and debris floating around it like the scattered pieces of broken dreams, and Lieutenant Yoon confirmed that life signs were still detected aboard the damaged vessel, but they were weak and fading rapidly, and there was no time to waste if they wanted to save the survivors. Dr. Park's voice came over the comm system, announcing that the medical teams were standing by, and that they had prepared isolation wards in case some of the refugees were suffering from diseases or radiation exposure, and that the universal translators were calibrated for Valthari speech patterns so they could communicate effectively with the survivors and provide proper medical care. And Captain Lee felt proud of his crew's professionalism and dedication as they prepared to risk their own safety to help strangers in need. The Healing Dawn's tractor beam locked onto the damaged transport and carefully drew it into the main cargo bay, where medical teams in environmental suits were waiting to board the vessel. and begin rescue operations. And the first team through the airlock found a scene of devastation with injured Valthari civilians, huddled together in the few sections of the ship that still had atmosphere, and many of them were suffering from radiation burns and decompression injuries, while others showed signs of malnutrition that suggested they had been fleeing the war zone for weeks. Nurse Kim So-young led her emergency response team through the damaged corridors of the transport, and her calm voice provided reassurance to the frightened refugees as she began triaging the most seriously injured and directing them to the medical teams waiting in the Healing Dawn's emergency bays. And despite the language barrier, her gentle manner and professional competence communicated clearly that these humans were there to help and not to harm. And slowly, the terrified Valthari began to trust their rescuers. Among the refugees was an elderly Valthari who introduced himself as Dr. Veltar and explained in broken standard that he was a physician who had been trying to keep his people alive during their desperate flight from the war zone, and he expressed amazement at the advanced medical equipment aboard the Healing Dawn and gratitude that the humans had risked their own safety to respond to their distress call. And Dr. Park welcomed him as a colleague and asked for his help in treating the Valthari patients since he understood their unique biology better than anyone. As the rescue operation continued, Captain Lee Taemin watched from the observation deck and felt satisfied that his crew was living up to the highest ideals of the medical profession by treating all patients with equal care and compassion, regardless of their species, and he knew that this was exactly why he had left military service to join the hospital ship program, because there was something fundamentally right about using human technology and training to preserve life rather than destroy it. The medical bays filled with patients as more survivors were brought aboard, and the human medical staff worked alongside Dr. Veltar to provide the best possible care for everyone, and children who had been crying in fear began to smile as nurses like Kim So-young showed them simple magic tricks and gave them small toys while their parents received treatment, and the universal translators allowed for communication that bridged the gap between species and created bonds of trust and mutual respect. Unknown to everyone aboard the Healing Dawn, 3 sleek warships painted in the dark colors of the Zilani Confederacy were watching from a distance, and their crews were not interested in providing medical assistance, but rather in claiming a prize that would make them rich beyond their dreams, because human medical technology was worth a fortune on the black market, and a hospital ship would be much easier to capture than a heavily armed warship. And they waited patiently for the perfect moment to spring. Their trap captain, Lee Tae-min, stood on his bridge, feeling proud of his crew's work and believing that they had just completed another successful rescue mission that proved the value of human compassion in a galaxy too often torn apart by war and hatred, and he had no idea that dangerous predators were circling his ship like sharks around a wounded whale, and that the peaceful mission of mercy was about to become something far more deadly. The rescue operation had been running smoothly for 6 hours when Lieutenant Yoon Da-eun detected another distress signal, and this time it came from what appeared to be a Zilani research vessel that claimed to be suffering from engine failure and requesting immediate assistance, and Captain Lee Tae-min studied the readings on his command screen, while Dr. Park continued working in the medical bays, treating the last of the Valthari refugees who were finally stable and out of immediate danger. Commander Choi Byung-ho approached the captain with obvious concern, written across his weathered face, and quietly pointed out that 2 distress calls in the same region of space within hours of each other seemed suspicious, and that perhaps they should contact the nearest military patrol before responding to this second emergency. But Captain Lee reminded him that interstellar medical law required them to respond to any legitimate distress signal, regardless of the potential risks, and that refusing to help could mean condemning innocent people to death. The Zilani vessel appeared on their main view screen as a medium-sized ship with the typical angular design favored by that species, and it showed signs of minor damage that could indicate either an accident or a carefully staged deception, and Lieutenant Yoon reported that she was receiving communications from the vessel in which the crew claimed to be civilian scientists conducting research on stellar phenomena, and that they had suffered a cascade failure in their main engines that left them stranded and unable to repair the damage themselves. Dr. Kang Min-ho was summoned to the bridge because his expertise in xenobiology made him the best qualified to assess any potential medical needs of the Zilani crew, and he reviewed the preliminary scans of the research vessel while expressing some puzzlement at the energy readings, which seemed inconsistent with a typical engine failure, but could possibly indicate some kind of experimental propulsion system that had malfunctioned during testing. Captain Lee Tae-min made his decision and ordered the helm to approach the Zilani vessel while instructing Dr. Park to prepare a medical team for possible casualties and Commander Choi to maintain readiness protocols, even though they expected this to be a routine assistance mission. And within 30 minutes, the Healing Dawn had moved into position alongside the research vessel and was preparing to receive the Zilani crew members who claimed to need medical attention. The first group of Zilani to board the hospital ship consisted of what appeared to be their senior staff, including someone who identified himself as the chief researcher, and several others who claimed to be engineers and scientists. And they all wore the typical gray uniforms of Zilani civilian personnel and carried identification cards that seemed legitimate, and they expressed gratitude for the human willingness to help strangers in need and praised the reputation of Terran medical technology. Medical technician Han Woo-jin escorted the Zilani visitors to examination rooms where Dr. Kang could assess their condition and determine what kind of treatment they might need. And the aliens cooperated fully with the medical procedures and answered questions about their health and medical history, while seeming genuinely grateful for the professional care they were receiving from the human medical staff nurse. Kim So-young was working with one of the Zilani who claimed to be suffering from radiation exposure. When she noticed something odd about his behavior and the way he kept glancing around the medical bay, as if he was memorizing the layout rather than focusing on his supposed medical problems. And when she mentioned this observation to Dr. Kang, he began paying closer attention to the other Zilani patients and realized that their medical complaints seemed rehearsed and unconvincing. The deception became obvious when the supposed chief researcher suddenly produced a concealed weapon and pointed it at Dr. Kang, while announcing that this was now a hostile takeover and that the Healing Dawn belonged to the Zilani Confederacy, and the other fake patients revealed similar weapons that had somehow passed through the ship's security scanners, and within minutes the entire medical bay was under the control of armed pirates who had used the distress call as a trick to get aboard the hospital. Ship Captain Lee Tae-min received the alarm signal from the medical bay and immediately understood that his worst fears had come true and that they were dealing with pirates who had used their compassion against them, and he quickly activated the ship's internal security protocols while Commander Choi began coordinating with the security teams to assess the situation and determine how many hostiles were aboard their vessel. The Zilani pirates revealed their true nature as they spread throughout the hospital ship and took control of key systems while using the patients and medical staff as hostages to prevent any resistance. And their leader made it clear that they were after the valuable medical technology and pharmaceutical supplies that would make them wealthy beyond imagination, and that they had chosen a hospital ship because it would be easier to capture than a military vessel. Dr. Park Ji-woo found herself face-to-face with armed pirates while she was in the middle of performing surgery on a critically injured Valthari child, and she calmly informed the Zilani that she would not stop the operation until her patient was stable, regardless of what threats they made against her, and her steady hands continued working while she explained that medical ethics required her to put patient care above her own safety. The pirates seemed surprised by the doctor's refusal to be intimidated, and their leader grew angry as he realized that the human medical staff would not simply abandon their duties even when threatened with violence, and he had expected to find frightened civilians who would immediately surrender, but instead discovered professionals who took their oath to heal seriously enough to risk their own lives. Nurse Kim So-young helped coordinate the care of patients while pirates stood guard over the medical bays, and she managed to send coded messages to other parts of the ship using the medical computer network, and her signals warned the crew about the number and location of hostiles, while also reassuring them that the patients were receiving continued care. Despite the dangerous situation, Commander Choi gathered his small security team and began planning a response that would neutralize the pirates without endangering the patients or medical staff, and he knew that the Healing Dawn's minimal weapons and defenses made it impossible to fight a conventional battle, but that their knowledge of the ship's systems might give them some advantages if they could coordinate properly with the medical personnel captain. Lee Tae-min made the most difficult decision of his career when he realized that resistance would likely result in casualties among the innocent refugees and medical staff who were now hostages, and he authorized the surrender of his ship to the pirates while secretly activating a hidden emergency beacon that would alert Terran authorities to their situation. The emergency beacon transmitted a coded signal known as Code White, which indicated that a medical vessel was under attack, and this signal automatically triggered response protocols throughout human space, as military commanders received notification that pirates had violated one of the most sacred laws of interstellar civilization by assaulting a hospital. Ship Lieutenant Yoon Da-yoon managed to send additional details about their attackers through the subspace communication system before the pirates took control of the bridge, and her transmission included information about the Zalani vessels and their approximate numbers, which would be crucial intelligence for any rescue operation that might be mounted. The Zalani pirates celebrated their easy victory and began making plans to transfer the most valuable medical equipment to their own ships while keeping the human crew alive, long enough to operate the complex systems they did not understand, and they believed they had scored the perfect crime by capturing a defenseless hospital. Ship full of advanced technology, Dr. Veltar watched the proceedings with growing alarm as he realized that these criminals had used his people's genuine distress as cover for their attack, and he quietly began speaking with other Valthari refugees about the debt they owed to the humans who had risked everything to save them, and who were now prisoners because they had responded to a call for help. Medical technician Han Woo-jin continued his duties under guard while mentally noting the positions and routines of the pirates, and he began developing ideas about how the medical staff might be able to fight back using their knowledge of human anatomy and the medical supplies that were readily available throughout the ship. The pirates had succeeded in capturing the Healing Dawn, but they had made a critical error in assuming that a hospital ship would be an easy target, because they did not understand that attacking those who heal was considered one of the most heinous crimes possible, and that the human response to such an assault would be swift and overwhelming. As the Zalani celebrated their victory and began cataloging their prizes, they remained unaware that their attack had triggered alarms throughout human space, and that warships were already changing course to respond to the Code White emergency signal, and that they had just made themselves the targets of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Admiral Song Hee-jin was reviewing fleet deployment reports in her command center when the Code White alert flashed across every screen in the facility, and the veteran officer felt her blood turn cold because she knew that signal meant pirates had committed the ultimate violation by attacking a medical vessel, and within seconds her staff was mobilizing every available warship within 3-star systems for an emergency response operation. The Terran Defense Force had protocols for many different types of emergencies, but Code White triggered the most comprehensive response possible because attacking healers was considered an act of war against all of humanity, and Admiral Song immediately began coordinating with fleet commanders throughout the sector, while emergency beacons summoned ships from patrol routes and training exercises to converge on the coordinates of the Healing Dawn captain. Lim Jun-seo received the alert aboard his battlecruiser Iron Will while conducting routine maneuvers near the Centauri system, and he immediately ordered his ship to maximum warp toward the hospital ship's last known position, while his communications officer contacted other vessels in the area to coordinate their response, and within minutes a growing armada of human warships was racing through hyperspace toward what might become the largest rescue operation in recent history. The news spread through human space faster than the ships themselves could travel, and civilian authorities began demanding action, while military commanders calculated response times and assault options, and the attack on the Healing Dawn became a rallying cry that united normally competing factions behind the single goal of rescuing the medical vessel and punishing those who had dared to threaten human healers. Aboard the captured hospital ship, Dr. Park Ji-woo continued treating patients, despite having Zalani guards watching her every move, and when one of the pirates ordered her to stop wasting time on the wounded aliens, she calmly explained that medical ethics did not recognize species boundaries, and that she would continue providing care regardless of threats made against her, and her quiet defiance inspired other members of the medical staff to maintain their professional standards. The Zalani leader grew increasingly frustrated as he discovered that the human crew would not abandon their duties even under the threat of violence, and he had expected to find frightened civilians who would cooperate out of fear, but instead encountered professionals who seemed more concerned about their patients than their own safety, and this unexpected resistance began to complicate his plans for a quick theft of valuable medical technology. Chief Engineer Bae Sung-kyu worked under guard while secretly introducing subtle malfunctions into the ship's systems, and his deep knowledge of every circuit and component allowed him to create problems that appeared to be random failures, but actually made the vessel increasingly difficult for the pirates to control, and he coordinated with other engineering personnel to ensure the sabotage would not endanger patients or medical equipment. Nurse Kim So-young discovered that her gentle manner and professional competence had earned the trust of several Valthari refugees who were now offering to help resist the pirates, and she realized that these aliens felt a deep debt of gratitude to the humans who had saved them and were willing to risk their own lives to protect their rescuers, and this unexpected alliance began forming the foundation of a resistance movement. The first human warships arrived at the coordinates and found the Healing Dawn surrounded by 3 Zalani vessels that were clearly military raiders rather than the research ship they had claimed to be. And Captain Lim Jun-seo immediately demanded the release of the hospital ship, while more human vessels continued arriving, and the pirates suddenly found themselves facing overwhelming odds. Commander Choi Byung-ho had managed to maintain communication with some of his security personnel, and they began coordinating plans for retaking key areas of the ship if an opportunity arose, and his years of military experience told him that the tide was turning as more human ships appeared on the scanner displays, and the pirates realized they had made a terrible mistake. The Zalani commander contacted his ships and ordered them to prepare for immediate departure, but discovered that Chief Engineer Bae's sabotage had made the Healing Dawn systems unreliable, and the docking clamps would not release properly, and the life support systems were experiencing random failures that made it dangerous to attempt a transfer of prisoners or cargo. Admiral Song arrived aboard her flagship with the main battle fleet, and the sight of dozens of human warships surrounding the small group of Zalani raiders sent a clear message about the seriousness with which humanity viewed attacks on medical personnel, and she opened communications with the pirates while her ships took defensive positions around the hospital ship. The Zalani leader found himself in an impossible situation as more human vessels continued arriving, and he realized that his small force was completely outmatched by the growing armada of warships that surrounded them. And his original plan of a quick raid had turned into a hostage crisis that could only end badly for everyone involved. Dr. Kang Min-ho used his knowledge of Zalani physiology to identify weaknesses that could be exploited if fighting became necessary, and he quietly shared this information with the medical staff, who began preparing improvised weapons from surgical instruments and pharmaceutical supplies, and the healers slowly transformed into potential warriors as they realized that protecting their patients might require violence. Lieutenant Yoon Da-yoon managed to re-establish limited communication with the human fleet and provided intelligence about the number and positions of pirates aboard the ship, while also coordinating with the resistance movement that was forming among the crew and refugees, and her reports helped the military commanders plan a rescue operation that would minimize casualties. The standoff continued for several hours as more human ships arrived, and the pirates realized they were facing not just a few patrol vessels, but the combined might of the Terran Defense Force, and Admiral Song made it clear that she would not negotiate with criminals who had violated interstellar medical law, and that the only acceptable outcome was the immediate surrender of all hostiles. Medical technician Han Woo-jin had been observing the routines and behaviors of his guards, and he began developing a plan to neutralize them, using pressure points and nerve clusters that he had studied during his training in emergency field medicine. And his knowledge of anatomy made him surprisingly effective as a potential combatant despite his role as a healer. The Valthari refugees led by Dr. Veltar held a quiet meeting in one of the medical bays and decided that they owed their lives to the humans and could not stand by while their rescuers were threatened, and they began coordinating with Nurse Kim to provide assistance in whatever way possible, and their gratitude had transformed into determination to help their saviors. The pirates were becoming increasingly desperate as they realized that escape was impossible, and their leader began making threats against the patients and medical staff in an attempt to force the human fleet to withdraw. But Admiral Song responded that threatening medical personnel and their patients would only ensure that the pirates faced the harshest possible punishment. Captain Lee Tae-min used his command codes to access internal sensors and began providing intelligence to the resistance movement about pirate movements and positions throughout. The ship and his knowledge of every corridor and compartment made him valuable as a coordinator, even though he remained under guard on the bridge. The human fleet had grown to nearly 50 vessels of various classes and sizes as ships continued, arriving from across the sector, and the sight of so many warships sent a clear message throughout the galaxy that humanity would not tolerate attacks on medical vessels, and that those who threatened healers would face overwhelming retaliation. The situation aboard the Healing Dawn was reaching a breaking point as the pirates realized they were trapped, and the human crew began preparing for action, and both sides understood that the standoff could not continue much longer, and that the next few hours would determine whether the rescue mission would end in triumph or tragedy. The stage was set for a confrontation that would demonstrate why humans had earned their reputation as both the most compassionate healers and the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, and the pirates were about to learn that attacking a Deathworlder hospital ship was the worst mistake they could have made. The breaking point came when the Zilani leader grew desperate and decided to force the human fleet to withdraw by making an example of his hostages. And he selected a young Valthari child who was still recovering from surgery and threatened to execute the patient unless Admiral Song ordered her ships to retreat immediately. And this threat against an innocent child under medical care proved to be the final mistake that sealed the pirate's fate. Dr. Park Ji-woo stepped between the armed pirate and her young patient, and calmly informed him that he would have to kill her first before harming anyone under her medical care. And her quiet courage inspired the entire medical staff as nurses and technicians moved to shield their patients from the increasingly desperate criminals, and the atmosphere aboard the ship changed from fearful compliance to determined resistance. The threat against a child patient triggered something primal in the human crew, and they began to reveal aspects of their death world nature that the pirates had not expected from peaceful medical personnel. And Nurse Kim So-young used her knowledge of pressure points to disable a guard, while medical technician Han Woo-jin employed nerve strikes he had learned during emergency combat training. And the healers began fighting with the precision that came from intimate knowledge of anatomy. Commander Choi Byung-ho coordinated the resistance from his position on the bridge, where he had been quietly organizing. Security personnel and engineering staff, and his years of military experience proved invaluable, as he directed a coordinated uprising that used the ship's own systems against the invaders, and Chief Engineer Bay triggered power failures in key areas to create confusion among the pirates. The Valthari refugees joined the fight despite their recent injuries, and Dr. Veltar led his people in supporting the humans who had risked everything to save them, and the aliens proved surprisingly effective allies as they used their knowledge of the ship's layout to move through maintenance corridors and coordinate attacks on isolated pirate positions. Admiral Song received reports of the fighting aboard the hospital ship and immediately authorized a precision boarding operation led by Major Jang Hee-young, whose Marine Special Forces team had been preparing for exactly this type of rescue mission, and the human military response was swift and overwhelming as boarding pods launched from multiple warships simultaneously. The Marines breached the Healing Dawn's hull in 6 different locations while avoiding areas containing patients and medical equipment, and their assault was timed to coincide with the internal uprising so that the pirates found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against enemies who knew every inch of the ship, and Major Jiang's forces moved through the corridors with deadly efficiency. Dr. Park continued operating on critical patients even as fighting raged around. Her medical bay and her steady hands never wavered as she worked to save lives while explosions echoed through the ship, and her dedication to her oath inspired everyone who witnessed her calm professionalism under the most extreme circumstances possible. The pirates discovered that humans were far more dangerous than they had realized when the peaceful medical staff began using their knowledge of anatomy against their captors, and sedatives became weapons when injected in the right locations. And surgical instruments proved surprisingly effective in the hands of professionals who understood exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Nurse Kim So-young led a team of medical personnel in coordinating with the Valthari refugees to establish secure zones around the most vulnerable patients, and her organizational skills and calm leadership helped maintain order during the chaotic fighting, and she demonstrated that caregivers could become fierce protectors when those under their care were threatened. The battle aboard the ship was brief but decisive as the combination of internal resistance and external assault overwhelmed the pirates who had expected an easy victory against defenseless healers, and instead found themselves facing the coordinated fury of humans whose protective instincts had been triggered by threats against medical personnel and patients. Major Zhang's Marines moved with precision through the ship as they systematically cleared each section of hostile forces while working to minimize damage to medical equipment and avoiding areas where patients were receiving treatment, and their tactics demonstrated the careful balance between overwhelming force and surgical precision that characterized human military operations. The fighting ended when the last pirate stronghold in the engine room was overrun by a coordinated assault involving Marine security personnel and engineering staff working together, and Chief Engineer Bay's knowledge of the ship's systems proved crucial in cutting off the criminals' escape routes and forcing them to surrender. Admiral Song established communication with Captain Li Taemin as soon as the ship was secure, and she commended his crew for their courage and professionalism during the crisis, while also expressing the fleet's admiration for the medical staff who had continued treating patients throughout the battle and never abandoned their duty to heal. The aftermath of the battle revealed the full extent of human dedication to medical ethics as Dr. Park and her staff immediately began treating wounded pirates alongside their other patients, and they provided the same level of professional care to the criminals who had threatened them, as they gave to the innocent refugees who had needed their help. Medical technician Han Woo-jin worked to stabilize injured pirates while explaining to bewildered Zalani that human medical ethics required treating all patients regardless of their actions, and this demonstration of compassion in the face of cruelty left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it and reinforced humanity's reputation as principled healers. The Valthari refugees who had fought alongside the humans expressed their amazement at witnessing beings who could transform from gentle healers to fierce warriors and back to compassionate caregivers within the span of a few hours, and Dr. Veltar began documenting what he had observed for future medical and anthropological studies. Commander Choi coordinated with Major Zhang to secure all captured pirates and ensure that evidence was properly collected for the war crimes trials that would inevitably follow, and the violation of interstellar medical law meant that the criminals would face the harshest possible sentences under galactic judicial systems. The human fleet maintained position around the Healing Dawn, while damage assessment teams began evaluating the ship's condition, and Admiral Song made it clear that this incident would not be forgotten, and that word would spread throughout the galaxy about what happened to those who attacked medical vessels and threatened healers. Captain Lim Jun-seo coordinated with other fleet commanders to ensure that news of the successful rescue operation reached all corners of human space and beyond, because the message needed to be clear that humanity would respond with overwhelming force to protect medical personnel and patients regardless of their species or allegiance. The battle had lasted less than 2 hours from start to finish, but its implications would resonate throughout the galaxy for years to come, as species everywhere learned that attacking human healers was not just a crime against interstellar law but a declaration of war against one of the most dangerous military forces in known space. The pirates had learned too late that the gentle humans who dedicated their lives to healing possessed the same Deathworld instincts that had made their species legendary warriors, and that threatening those under medical care would trigger a response that combined surgical precision with overwhelming firepower and absolute determination to protect the innocent. The Healing Dawn had been saved, and its mission of mercy could continue, but the galaxy now understood that human compassion came with teeth, and that those who threatened medical personnel would face the full wrath of a species that treated healing as sacred and would fight to the death to protect those who could not protect themselves. The captured Zalani pirates sat in the Healing Dawn's detention facility, receiving the same professional medical care that Dr. Park and her staff provided to all patients. And this demonstration of human medical ethics in action amazed observers throughout the galaxy who monitored the aftermath of what was already being called the Healing Dawn incident, and even those who had committed crimes against healers were treated with compassion and dignity. Admiral Song convened a fleet conference aboard her flagship to discuss the implications of the attack and the response it had generated, and representatives from dozens of species attended via quantum communication to witness the unprecedented gathering of human military might that had assembled to protect a single hospital ship. And the message was clear that attacking medical vessels would bring swift and overwhelming retaliation. Captain Lee Tae-min stood before the assembled fleet commanders and spoke about the dedication of his medical crew who had never wavered in their commitment to healing, even when their own lives were threatened, and he praised the courage of the Valthari refugees who had risked their recovery to help protect the humans who had saved them, and his words reinforced the bonds between species that were forged through shared adversity. The Zalani Confederacy sent an official delegation claiming that the pirates had acted without government authorization and demanding the return of their citizens, but Admiral Song made it clear that the criminals would face justice under Terran law for their violation of interstellar medical conventions, and that this precedent would apply to future attacks on hospital ships, regardless of the perpetrators. Origin's Dr. Park Ji-woo returned to her duties in the medical bays, where she continued treating both the original Valthari refugees and the wounded from the recent battle. And her calm professionalism throughout the crisis had earned her recognition as a symbol of human medical dedication, and several galactic medical organizations began discussing honors and awards for her service. The story of how medical technician Han Woo-jin had used his knowledge of anatomy to disable armed pirates spread quickly through medical communities across known space, and his actions demonstrated that healers could become effective combatants when protecting their patients, and this revelation changed how many species viewed human medical personnel. Nurse Kim So-young found herself caring for the same Zalani pirates she had fought against during the rescue operation, and her gentle manner and professional competence gradually won the respect of even these hardened criminals who began to understand that human compassion extended even to those who had threatened them. And this transformation became a powerful symbol of medical ethics in action. The Valthari government sent a formal delegation to thank the crew of the Healing Dawn, and Dr. Veltar served as their representative while also proposing an exchange program between Valthari and human medical institutions that would allow both species to learn from each other and advance the cause of interspecies medicine throughout the galaxy. Chief Engineer Bae Sung-kyu worked with human naval architects to design new safety systems for hospital ships that would prevent future pirate attacks while maintaining the vessel's humanitarian mission, and his innovations included hidden defensive systems that could be activated without compromising medical operations, and these improvements would be implemented across the entire medical fleet. Commander Choi Byung-ho submitted a detailed report about the security failures that had allowed the pirates to board the ship, and his recommendations led to new protocols for verifying distress signals and screening rescue subjects without compromising the medical corps' commitment to helping anyone in need, regardless of species or circumstance. No. Trial of the Zalani pirates became a galactic sensation as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to witness justice being served for the violation of one of the most fundamental laws of civilized space, and the proceedings established important precedents about the protection of medical personnel and facilities during conflicts. Lieutenant Yoon Da-eun received commendation for her role in coordinating communications during the crisis and maintaining contact with the human fleet while under hostile control, and her actions helped ensure that the rescue operation was conducted with maximum efficiency and minimum casualties among both hostages and rescuers. The Human Medical Corps announced that all hospital ships would now travel with permanent military escorts to prevent future attacks, but this decision sparked debate about whether armed protection was compatible with the humanitarian mission of medical vessels, and ultimately a compromise was reached that provided discreet security without compromising medical neutrality. Dr. Veltar published a comprehensive study of human medical ethics and deathworld psychology that became required reading in medical schools throughout the galaxy, and his analysis of how humans could transform from gentle healers to fierce warriors while maintaining their compassion provided insights that influenced interspecies relations for generations. The Healing Dawn resumed its mission of mercy, but now carried a legendary reputation throughout known space as the hospital ship, whose crew had fought pirates while continuing to treat patients. And this story became a recruitment tool for the medical corps as young humans sought to join an organization that embodied the highest ideals of their species, Major Jang Hee-young and her Marine unit were awarded the highest honors for their precision rescue operation, and their tactics became the standard for liberating captured medical vessels, and the success of their mission reinforced human military doctrine about protecting humanitarian operations with overwhelming force when necessary. The incident prompted the Galactic Medical Council to establish new protocols for protecting hospital ships and medical personnel, and these regulations included severe penalties for attacking healers and mandatory military response to any code-white emergency signal, and the human approach to medical ethics became the foundation for interstellar medical law. Captain Lim Jun-seo found himself promoted to admiral after his leadership during the fleet response, and he used his new position to establish rapid reaction forces dedicated to protecting medical vessels throughout human space, and his innovations in humanitarian military operations influenced naval doctrine across multiple species. The Valthari refugees who had fought alongside the human crew during the pirate attack became ambassadors for human Valthari relations, and their testimony about human courage and compassion helped forge an alliance that would endure for centuries, and their children grew up learning about the debt their people owed to the healers of Earth. Admiral Song established the Healing Dawn Memorial Fleet consisting of hospital ships with discreet military escorts, and this force became the model for humanitarian operations throughout the galaxy, as other species adopted similar approaches to protecting medical personnel while maintaining their neutrality and dedication to healing. The pirates who survived their capture and trial spent years in rehabilitation facilities where they received counseling and medical treatment from the same humans they had threatened, and many of them emerged from prison with profound respect for human medical ethics, and some even became advocates for medical neutrality and the protection of healers. The legacy of the Healing Dawn incident extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation, as it established principles that governed interspecies medical relations for generations, and the story of how human healers had fought to protect their patients while maintaining their compassion became a defining moment in galactic history. The message resonated throughout known space that humans were both the most dedicated healers and the most dangerous protectors in the galaxy, and that attacking those who devoted their lives to preserving life would bring swift and overwhelming retaliation from a species that treated medical ethics as sacred and would fight to the death to defend them. Years later, when new species encountered humanity for the first time, they invariably heard the story of the hospital ship whose crew had transformed from gentle healers to fierce warriors and back to compassionate caregivers within hours, and this tale became the foundation for understanding human nature and the principles that guided their civilization throughout the stars.